when you saw what happened with the bond route today, you understand this stuff much better than a lot of us. What did you think?
I mean, I've been waiting for it. I wondered what took them so long, and we've had sort of the ups and downs. But the first thing that I said was the bond market is a honey badger. If you remember, the old honey badger doesn't give a you know what,
Hmm.
and the bond market is going to do what the bond market is going to do. And so, for all the people who keep calling for the Fed to cut rates, I keep trying to explain that we are in a period of what's called fiscal dominance, where fiscal policy is basically dominating monetary policy, and we can get into the whys of all of that. But we are up almost 100 basis points from where we were when the Fed decided to first cut rates.
Hmm.
So you can see that the Fed has really lost the long end of the curve, and we're getting into, I think you mentioned that red, kind of red zone. I think when we get to 4.8 on the 10-year, you start really getting everybody perked up. If it goes to 5, I would imagine we're going to see some intervention. But it really just speaks to our broken fiscal foundation and the fact that we don't have a lot of options, and we're not getting a lot of help from Congress right now.
Well, yeah, but there's that. But there's also the Japanese. I don't want to get into the Japanese bond route over there, but that was that was the first. Hey, everybody, this skunk hole's starting to stink. Government debt is catching up with us, and yet we're nowhere near that metric, that debt ratio that the Japanese are. So why in the United States would people be freaking out? Because I'll bet you we hit that 5% in the 10-year, and I bet you we hit it pretty soon.
Yeah, well, Japan is its own weird entity. They always say there are advanced economies, there are emerging economies, and then there's Argentina and Japan. And it's got a weird dynamic where, they have a high savings rates that kind of changes the dynamic. But for us as the, holder of the currency that has been the world's reserve currency and trading currency, we've gotten a little bit of flexibility. I mean, if you look at our debt to GDP,
Hmm.
we basically have the equivalent of an emerging market balance sheet. I mean, we would have a sovereign debt crisis if it were not the fact that the dollar was used, so frequently in trade, and still is a substantial portion of reserves. But what's interesting, over the last 10 plus years, is central banks have actually been net sellers of treasuries. I'm not sure people really understand that. And they have not been replacing the dollars with another currency. They've been replacing that on their balance sheet with gold, which is why we've seen, gold kind of go through the roof here. But what that means is what we're left with are the price sensitive buyers, right? Central banks, in terms of treasuries, are not particularly price sensitive. And now we're seeing the term premium, the premium that investors are demanding for holding the securities for longer. We're seeing that start to rise. And I think that, that's going to continue to play into the dynamic here.
And in a second, we're going to take a step back. I want to ask you about the book. When I interviewed Sam Stovall and then in a discussion with some of my colleagues at my other job at the Pizza Hut, they were talking about the fact that despite the quantitative easing and the alleged trying to get down the balance sheet, that the Fed is actually buying quietly U.S. Treasuries. And when I heard that, and I'm not an economist, but it worried me because it's not something they're talking about publicly. But if they're doing that, what is it they're trying to do? And will they have to pick it up and do more of that given what we're witnessing to get interest rates down?
Yeah, I think the likelihood of what happens is that there's some percentage, and we can call it 5, but maybe it's a little bit less than a little bit more, that when the 10-year hits, the entire market is going to kind of puke on itself. And I think there's going to be some form of intervention. And puke on itself is the technical term, by the way. And I think that the Fed, with their QT that's not QT, whatever it is that they're doing, QT that's QE, it's a what's kind of a not quite yield curve control, but not really not yield curve control. You also have the Treasury, who's been doing buybacks too. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think you're going to see more intervention, whatever they call it. But yield curve control is like a QE, except for it's unlimited, right? It's whatever amount is required to get interest rates into a certain area that everybody's comfortable with. And given the amount of debt that we have to finance and refinance this year, it's not at the levels that we have today, or we end up in this crazy debt spiral where interest expands the deficit, which means we have to finance more, which means yields go up, and we end up in an ugly spiral. So I do think we're going to see more intervention, and it can come in lots of different flavors. They're very creative, but the release valve on the other side of that is inflation. And I think that is what you're seeing, in the market, the part of the market that's super smart and kind of, senses what's going on, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's gold, whether it's, in the bond market, that there's an understanding that there aren't a lot of options here. And that means that we're probably going to see a return to inflation again, not getting a lot of help from Congress in terms of cutting spending to reduce the deficit, to cut down on the chances of a debt spiral or something like that.
I used the term fakakta earlier in the stream. I'm going to say
I appreciate that
at this point.
Yeah.
So I measure inflation. I call it my Talenti metric, because I can get Talenti gelato for $5.99 at one supermarket, but at the one across the street from us, I have to actually walk further to get it. It's $9.99, and I don't know why any New Yorker, as crazy as the city is, would pay $9.99 for the stuff when you can get it 10 blocks away for $5.99. Let me talk to you about the book. You Will Own Nothing: Your War with a New Financial World Order and How to Fight Back. I've not read the book, but I want to ask you a question, because I had a guest on who a long time ago pointed out that the genius of Elon Musk is that no one will own a car, they'll have to lease it. It's kind of this perpetual cycle of payments for everything. Is that the issue that you're hitting upon in You Will Own Nothing, or is it even worse than that?
So it's actually a combination of a whole slew of different things, and technology renting our lives back to us as a subscription or a service is certainly a piece of that. It's also Wall Street going in and buying up all the homes and renting it back. It's also the Fed printing money and making it harder for people to save and to, kind of creating more non-merit based inequality. And so it's basically all these different things that are happening, just as we are on this precipice of the financial world order changing, all the things that we're talking about, the fact that, we're kind of losing control of our position as the center of the financial world, which has been completely self-inflicted, and all the things that kind of go along with that. And so, I wanted to give people some thoughts about, all these different, kind of interferences to wealth creation, because you know as well as I do that wealth creation comes from owning things, and people who haven't owned things in history have not been wealthy, and in many cases have not been particularly happy. So really talking through all the different areas that are coming at people, and then giving a prescription to fight back.
Well, my colleagues used to fight over who got to go to Davos for the World Economic Forum. And I used to say, good riddance, go for it. I mean, nothing better than noblesse oblige, the very wealthy flying in their private jets to complain about climate change. But did the inspiration for this come from things you witnessed among the wealthiest among us at Davos?
Well, so I have never been to Davos. I'm not a fan of the World Economic Forum
You
and
score
all of
points for
those
that.
elitists, but that is where the title came from, right? And it's their famous video, their 8 predictions for 2030, and their number one was "You will own nothing and you'll be happy." And I just thought that was so funny, and the language is so interesting, because it's always "you will own nothing." It's not "we will own nothing." Like, we're going to be great, but you will own nothing. And I thought that was the perfect encapsulation of these very elite who are trying to jockey for control as the system is changing, and make sure that they have, their wealth and their property rights secured at the expense of, everyone else, the middle class, the American dream. And so that wasn't the starting point, but when I started taking all these different points together, it really just hit me that saying was the perfect encapsulation to kind of move forward with.
So how does someone fight back?
You got to do exactly the opposite, right? You got to do what they are doing instead of what they're saying. Everybody who's telling you not to own things are doubling down on owning things. They're owning farmland, they're owning gold, they're owning homes, they're owning stocks. They're doing everything that it is that they say not to do. And so, I know people like to spend and like their experiences and like to live a light life. And I'm not saying spend on stuff. I'm saying invest in things that have the opportunity to hold its value. Because as we talk about, if we are going to see a return to inflation, we're likely going to see asset inflation as well as cost of living inflation. And you want to make sure that you're keeping up with that. So own. That's my takeaway
Hey,
there.
listen, I know that a lot of your fans, and you've got, six-figure following on just Twitter. So if you're watching and you want to ask Carol a question, put your question into the Twitter feed. We will make sure she gets it. Yeah, there you go. We've got thousands watching right now, thanks to you. So I owe you next time you're in New York City. But let me ask you this. And last week, I joked about this at the top of the stream. I do this thing now where I get to, I used to call it pontificating and rambling, but I try to hear the facts, very sensible. We have a socialist who's going to run for mayor in New York City, and I think he's going to win for all kinds of reasons we don't have to get into. But he has an idea, which personally I think is a good one, free public transportation, why I think it's a good idea, you can pay for it. And there's no way to pay for it. You just can't. So I would table it till you can figure out a way to pay for it. When you look at the federal government, when did we lose the understanding of, look, it's okay to leverage going forward, but when did we get out of control with it? Because now the bill is coming due.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people would point to us going off the gold standard. It's the thing that opened the floodgates for that to happen. When you move from a backed currency to a fiat currency,
Mm-hmm.
it creates all kinds of moral hazard. I think that in terms of our lifetimes, where we've really saw the shift was probably during the Great Recession financial crisis, the enabling of that and the response to that, and this idea that somehow we shouldn't let ourselves go through these recessions, that we should print to prop up the stock market, that we shouldn't, kind of go through the natural cycles, that we should disrupt risk, and we should basically, give money to the asset holders at the expense of the savers and the retirees. I mean, that really opened that door for that non-merit driven inequality. I don't mind inequality that's merit based, right? If
Mm-hmm.
Michael Jordan, Beyonce, they should get paid a lot of money because they're great
Amen.
at what they do. But when it's the government and government, related entities that are tipping the scales, I have a huge problem with that. And unfortunately, most people can't put their finger on that, right? They want to blame capitalism or they want to blame something else. And they don't understand that this has been based on government, fiscal and monetary policy that has really driven the shift.